Okay, so welcome to Brown Bag History for October 8th, 2025. We'll be talking about epidemics today, and we acknowledge that the land around Revelstoke and on the Columbia River and its tributaries is Sinak's homeland and traditional territory. We acknowledge the ties of the Secwepemc, the Okanagan Nation Alliance, and the Ktunaxa to this land. We acknowledge our use and inhabitation of this land sacred to these four nations. Um, so talk about some of the early uh, epidemics and outbreaks of disease that happened in the community. Um, we'll be talking a little bit more about smallpox, but as we just did a recognition of the land acknowledgement, acknowledging the First Nations in this area. I think it's worth mentioning that a lot of Indigenous people across Canada were wiped out by or died of smallpox. There were whole communities that were wiped out. Um, the In the late 1770s, the disease hit the northwest coast with trading and exploration on the northwest coast of BC, and killed many members of the West Coast nations, and it spread into the interior through internation trade. So the Snacks Nation, who didn't really have contact with Europeans at that time. They had contact with other nations that had. So smallpox actually hit the Sinixt people and a lot of the other interior uh, nations, including the Ktunaxa and other interior Salish nations. So there was quite a bit of population decrease as a result of the smallpox. That there was a second widespread outbreak in starting in 1862. And in that outbreak on the coast alone, about 14,000 Indigenous people died, almost about half of the region's population. So it was a serious illness, and even though there was a vaccine, it wasn't widely available, especially to the Indigenous people at that time. So this fellow on the left is Dr. E.H.S. McLean, and he was born in Ontario and graduated as a doctor in 1891. He came to Revelstoke in 1892 and was offered the position of health officer for the West Kootenay district, which it would have covered like what's now like Castlegar and Nelson and Trail and that whole area. And there was a smallpox outbreak in the region at that time, and McLean was credited with controlling the spread of the disease. So he settled in Revelstoke and had a clinic, which would have been next door to Smythe's Pool Hall, which is across the street, the building across the street. It's now I think Rise Snowboard is businesses in that at the moment. So it would have been right next. Dr. McLean's office was next to that.
Which side?
I believe on the left side, which the building is no longer there. The Revelstoke had its own, at that time was covered under the provincial health office, and they would have, they would appoint people in different districts throughout the area. And when Revelstoke was incorporated in 1899, we had our own public health officer, and that continued for quite a few years. Um, Typhoid was a disease that showed up in the area off and on in the early days of the community. In 1891, there was a note of a man who was brought up from Greenslide suffering from typhoid fever, and he was sent to the Kamloops Hospital that evening. Didn't find anything about whether he survived or not, but there was no hospital at all in Revelstoke at that time. In 1898, mentioned that a man named George Bristol of Ferguson was very low at the hospital with typhoid fever. And at that point, the hospital was this building that you can see here just on the top of the Douglas Street Hill. The building is still there. It's a private home now. And at the time, it was run by Dr. McKechnie, who was a doctor that came to this area, and Dr. Jeffs. And they ran it along with Dr. McKechnie's sister and her niece, who were both working as nurses. So it was just a privately run hospital, and that was the only hospital available in Revelstoke at the time. So George Bristol had Ferguson had been brought up and died at the hospital the same day that he was brought up in end of August. He was 34 years old. And then on September 4th, a man named J.J. McGregor, age 24, died at the hospital. And then there was several more incidents in October. A.E. Kincaid, who was a well-known miner in this area, it was said he was brought here from near Robson, suffering from a severe attack of typhoid. He did survive. And then another couple, Mr. and Mrs. James Morgan, were very ill with typhoid at their residence, and they survived. And Ernest J. Francis, age 27, died of typhoid fever on October 15th. So there was several deaths around that time. And in October 22nd of 1898, the newspaper said that typhoid fever was claiming many citizens throughout the Kootenays. Uh, there was a W.J. James in the hospital, and a William Page recovered and left the hospital, and Mr. and Mrs. Morgan were recovering at home. By the end of October, it reported that the cases in town were abating. We're not sure of the exact number of cases. It was never reported in the newspaper, but I think it was more than the numbers that I was able to find. So I think there were other small outbreaks of typhoid over the years, but none of them became sort of really of huge epidemic proportions. Measles was something that hit children quite hard. And in 1897, there were two measles deaths in town. One of them was Margaret McCarty, who was the daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Florence, or Frank McCarty. She was just 8 years and 2 months old when she died. And her father became the mayor when the city was incorporated in 1899. The family had, Margaret was actually, I believe she was born here, so she was a really early resident of the area. There was another little girl named Emma Watson, age 6, who also died, and said that there were a couple of more suspected cases of measles at the home of a family in Lowertown with two of the children ill, and that home was placed in quarantine. So if there was illness in a home, the home would be placed in quarantine. And then in case of like bigger outbreaks, there'd be bans underway in the community. There was measles outbreaks happened several times over the years. In 1902, said that there was after a large increase in cases, the spread of the measles epidemic caused an impromptu meeting of the school board. The board decided to shut the school down for the Friday, during which time the rooms would be fumigated. And then also 1908, and then another incident we found was in 1920. In February 12th, the schools, theaters, and all public meetings were closed due to the increasing amounts of sickness in the city. It said that measles was so prevalent that several rooms in Central School had been closed for some time, and said that the flu seems to be milder than that of the previous year, but precautions are being taken to stop it from spreading. And there was also chickenpox and other diseases and influenza going around at the same time. In February 26, 1920, said the health ban was still on for at least another week due to the number of existing measles cases in the city. The churches were to open on March 7th, and central and high schools and theater on March 8th, and Selkirk School remained closed longer. And then March 11th, the Dr. Hamilton, who's seen there on the left, he was the medical health officer for the city for many years. And he announced that the entrance class of Selkirk School would open on Monday, but the rest of the school would remain closed for at least another week. The ban still remained on Sunday schools and on children 12 years of age and under at the theaters. It said the influenza conditions were improving, but measles cases were continuing. So in that case, they talked about removing the bans, but they had to put them back on because more cases came up. So they actually had bans in place for several weeks that year of March of 1920. Mentioned smallpox at the beginning. There were occasional outbreaks of smallpox in Revelstoke. In February of 12th of 1910, it mentioned that smallpox was spreading south of Nakusp, with 12 new cases being reported. And by the next week, it was mentioned that there were 2 cases of smallpox reported in the annex of the city restaurant, which was also a boarding house owned by Andrew Cowie on First Street. So you can see in this photograph, it's right behind this building was the Molson's Bank, and Cowie's restaurant and boarding house was right next to it. This property is now part of the Regent Hotel. But in 1910, it was owned by the restaurant. Um, so said that the whole establishment was placed under strict quarantine, and there were close to 50 people in there at the time. So that those whole 50 people were under quarantine and were not allowed to leave. And it said the infected individuals were taken to the pest house. And I've never been able to find out where the pest house was located. Um, Probably just outside of city limits or somewhere a bit isolated from the main part of the town. The third case broke out at Cowie's restaurant of a waitress named Miss Crawford, and she was also removed to the pest house. And the people who were uh, in quarantine in Cowie's, most of them were not very happy about it, and people were trying to escape from it. So the city police actually put guards around the restaurant and boarding house to stop people from leaving and breaking quarantine. And it mentioned by the end of February that one of the cases at the pest house had recovered and was looking at the other man, and a nurse had been secured for Miss Crawford. There was an editorial in the Kootenai Mail newspaper saying that the city health department should make better provision for the victims of the smallpox epidemic. They said that the 2 men and 1 woman were sharing this very small, basically a shack, with a partition dividing it into 2 rooms. And they also were complaining about the fate of the 45 or 50 people who were still under quarantine at Cowie's restaurant. They said that about 50 people should be quarantined right in the heart of the most populous part of the city is a menace to the public health. It would be better if these people could be moved out of the city altogether into comfortable quarters. By the March 23rd, it was believed that it was not likely that there would be further cases. And under that circumstance, quarantine was released, so those people were finally able to leave. And Cowie was trying to get them to pay for their stay there, and of course they all refused because they didn't want to be there. And so Cowie submitted a bill to the city of Revelstoke for $1,188, which is a heck of a lot of money in 1910. And said that the city council report said that they submitted the bill to the city solicitor. And I wasn't able to find out how it was resolved, but I'm hoping that Cowie got his money because he was apparently an extremely nice guy. He died in Revelstoke in 1937 at the age of 84. And his obituary talked about how incredibly kind he was. He would help out anybody in need. He would take people in if they didn't have lodging. And somebody even wrote a poem about him saying just what a kind, nice person he was. So I'm hoping he got his money from the city because he was a good guy. So every now and then you'd see little outbreaks of smallpox in other years. In 1924, in February, a man named J.H. Moore died of smallpox at Glacier, where he and 3 others were in isolation. He'd never been vaccinated. And then on April 16th of 1924, Thomas Walker had smallpox. He'd been working at a road camp near Craigellachie. He was placed in isolation in a shack near the old Long Brewery, which is on the hill across the tracks, where he and another man had been living. They were both in quarantine, and Walker died on April 22nd at the age of 62. The shack in which he had been quarantined was destroyed under supervision of the health officer and the fire brigade. And it mentioned in the paper that if any other cases developed, they would be taken to the new isolation hospital, which was practically ready for use. And the isolation hospital was built on the hospital grounds, which is now the Alpine Village Mall. So it wasn't, I don't think it was had very much use, but it stood there for several years until finally, I think possibly in the 50s or so, it was moved down to, I think it was 2nd Street West down in Lower Town. And the site was where Harold Chevron and then Keith Chevron was located, and it's now the site of the EV chargers in the Save-On parking lot, or the Alpine Village Mall parking lot. Yeah, it wasn't, I don't think it saw much use, but they had it there. It was actually built by the Pratolini brothers, and it was 35 by 46 feet and of, I could say, of bungalow design. It cost just $5,010 to build. The the Dr. Hamilton and a few other people, somebody else from the hospital board, and three women from the Red Cross Society went to City Hall in 1920 talking about the need for the isolation hospital. And it just barely squeaked by passing from the council. The Mayor Buse had to break the tie vote, and he voted in favor of it. But most of the city council wasn't in favor of it. They said that for the few cases that would be involved, it would be easier to just rent a facility outside of city limits. But it was built and used a little bit until it was moved, and it's a private residence now. So now we get into the Spanish flu epidemic of 1918. There's a lot of different theories about how it started, but there were cases reported in army base in Kansas in March of 1918, believed to have been caused by contamination from a nearby farm, and it is possible that the disease spread from there. It was given the name Spanish flu by May of 1918, when Spain, who was a neutral country, was one of the few that was freely able to report on the spread of the disease. So that's why it ended up being called Spanish flu. Over the course of the epidemic, it was estimated that up to 100 million people died, between 3 to 5% of the world population at that time. 50,000 Canadians died, including 37 people from Revelstoke. The majority of the people who died were between the ages of 20 to 40. The cause of death was often given as pneumonia, which was a common progression of the disease. And of course, there was no penicillin at this time. So by September, the Spanish flu was widespread in eastern Canada and was in Revelstoke by the end of October. World War I was just coming to an end, and there was scarcity throughout the country. And people had been on food rations for some time, and the economy was still in a slump after the 4-year war effort. By the end of October, there were several flu cases in Revelstoke, and people were looking at ways to stop the spread. This ad appeared in the October 23rd, 1918 issue of the Revelstoke Review, an ad for Bu's drugstore, which some of you will remember was later became Donaldson's Drugs on Mackenzie Avenue, and then later PharmaSave. But they were advertising these. It said, "We have the preventatives against the influenza epidemic. Spray your nose and throat daily with our antiseptic solution. Atomizers and sprays of all kinds. Millions of germs destroyed in your nose and throat by the above treatment." And the Canadian Pacific Railway was also taking precautions to stop the spread of the flu. Of course, that was really the only way to travel across the country at that time. So they had issued stringent instructions regarding the cleaning of all passenger cars and stations. By the end of October, there were several cases of flu in town and several people in the hospital. The newspaper was being overly optimistic, though, and stated the local cases of Spanish flu are reported to be well in hand, and it is hoped that it will soon be a thing of the past. Compared with many other places throughout the country, Revelstoke has been extremely fortunate. That didn't continue, though. There were quite a few more cases and deaths after that. The schools, churches, and theaters and all public gatherings were closed under a flu ban order by October 23rd. The nursing staff at the hospital was overwhelmed, and many local women were assisting them, including members of the Women's Canadian Club and several teachers. Revelstoke had several nurses on staff, and they also ran a nurses training school through Queen Victoria Hospital. So they even with the numbers they had, they were really stretched thin, and people were other women in town were helping with nursing duties. By November 7th, 1918, the first deaths were being reported. 7 people died between October 30th and November 5th. All but 2 of these were under the age of 45. One of those who died was Harry Turnross, age 23. By the end of the epidemic, one of his sisters and one of his brothers had also died. So the Turnross family lost 3 family members in the flu epidemic. Mrs. Maria Fiocco, age 29, died. She was a young mother. She was the wife of Philip Fiocco, a well-known local baker. And she was also the mother of Kay Fiocco, who later was Kay Baruski. On November 11th, 1918, the Great War came to an end after 4 long years. Revelstoke celebrated the end of the war with a huge outdoor gathering and a parade that wound its way throughout the entire city between Farwell and Downey Street, which were the city boundaries at that time. Speeches were given outside of City Hall. There's no sign of any social distancing there, and there's clearly no masking either. So, but I think the war had taken a huge toll on Revelstoke. More than 600 men had left the community to fight, and close to 100 of those died. Clearly, the need to celebrate overweighed the concern about the flu at the time. The parade had been delayed until 12:30 due to the funeral of Alan MacDonald, age 29. He was a returned soldier who had died on November 10th. Before his service in the war, he was a CPR trainman in Revelstoke. He had been invalided home due to trench fever in December of 1917, and in the fall of 1918, he contracted the flu and died of pneumonia. His funeral was held in the Catholic Church, and then his body was taken to the station, where he was sent to his family home in Nova Scotia for burial. And after the train had left, then the community had their armistice parade. Between November 6th and November 11th, another 9 people died. They were all between the ages of 22 and 48. Among them were Tomi Irene Hashimoto, age 30, and Hatsu Lily Morikawa, age 25. They were 2 Japanese women who worked in the sex trade, and they owned their own home together on Douglas Street. Also dead was Gus Leonard, age 48, of Albert Canyon, who left a wife and 7 children. He'd only been sick for 3 days before his death. It was mentioned in the paper a few times that although the churches were closed, they were still welcoming donations. I think, of course, they were seeing a hit in their weekly donations from their attendees. So there was notes in the paper saying where people could drop off their donations to the church while the ban was on. There was they were hopeful that the flu ban could be lifted by the end of November, but between the last report in the middle of November and when they were hoping to lift the ban, there were another 9 deaths, and all between the ages of 22 and 50. One of the people who died was Luigi DeMarco, age 22, who was the brother of Maria Fiocco, who had just died earlier in November. There was a note about a possible work on a vaccine. It said Nicholson Laboratories was the first in Canada to prepare a Spanish influenza vaccine. More than 200,000 doses have been administered in Toronto, as well as many municipalities throughout Ontario, the places as far west as Saskatchewan and BC. So it was hoping that the vaccine would be available before too long. They were encouraging people to fumigate their houses and clean out the flu germs. McDonald's drugstore advertised that they had sulfur and formalin candles to help to fumigate your house. Um, they were talking at the end of November about conditionally lifting the flu ban. Said the churches would open Sunday and schools on Monday. The medical health officer warned citizens to continue to practice cautionary measures. The opening was conditional on the conditions that conditions would continue to improve. The lifting of the ban included the YMCA, lodges and societies and theaters. The only exception was Big Eddy School, which was a rural school at the time, where there were still considerable flu cases. The Empress Hotel was hoping to open on November 2nd. It had been thoroughly fumigated and ventilated, and they were going to be showing a Mary Pickford movie. There were still a few more deaths occurring. A man named Thomas Goad, who was a miner, age 50, died on November 29th. And Elsie Hall, age 25, of Hall's Landing, died on November 30th. There were special Thanksgiving services for the victory of the Allies held in all the city churches on Sunday. It said, notwithstanding the recent flu epidemic, all of the churches were well attended. Initially, they had the ministers had wanted to hold a single service for the whole community, but Dr. Hamilton ruled against that, said that he would allow the individual churches to gather, but not as one whole group. There's an ad for gin pills and the Spanish flu. Flu can cause weakened kidneys. If you have suffered from the flu, try gin pills and safeguard yourself against the possibility of more serious kidney disorders. So there were still more deaths happening at the end of December, and the city put Dr. Hamilton enforced the flu ban again. So there was a second wave coming on. A lot of people were disappointed that the ban was coming on right after Christmas, when nowadays we celebrate Christmas the month before Christmas, but then they celebrated Christmas the week of Christmas. So there were a lot of festivities and parties and gatherings that were planned for the week after Christmas Day. And so there was a lot of disappointment that those all had to be put aside. The It said the fact that there were practically 2 full weeks in which no flu existed in the city caused many to feel that the trouble was over, but the second wave, which is general throughout the country, has rendered it absolutely necessary to take every precaution, with an automatic closure of churches, schools, and theaters. And there were 3 more deaths at the end of December. A little 5.5-year-old Japanese boy, and we believe that he was the son of a man who had died in November. And Thomas Gillespie, age 59, who was a CPR bridge foreman, and said it was a sudden onset. He was only in the hospital for a few hours, and said had been in apparent good health almost up to the day of his death. And then December 29th, Gustav Turnross died, age 22. It was a brother of the other Turnross that I'd mentioned, Harry. And their sister Hilda, I think, was at the coast, but she died as well. January 9th, Doris Fleetham died at the age of 23. She was the wife of Fred Fleetham. She left her husband and 2-year-old daughter. She'd been ill for about a week. And then another 3-year-old Japanese boy died early in December. And then the 3-year-old son of Mr. and Mrs. G.O.P. Davis. And Davis was a really well-known local CPR employee. They lived on 2nd Street West, just a couple of blocks down from here. And that time there were several new cases reported in town. So by the middle of January, said the flu ban was to come off the next Sunday. Churches would be open on Sundays and schools open on Monday, and the Empress Theater on Monday night. That there had been was general rejoicing in the community. The second ban had been on since December 26th. It said the inroads made into the year's work at the schools will no doubt be quite manifest, and the teaching staff will be glad to get down to business again. So there were very few cases remaining in the community at that time. But on the end of January of 1919, Annie Mae Jolliffe McSorley died at the age of 26, died suddenly of the flu. She was a former member of staff in the telephone company, and she had just given birth. Her daughter was just 4 weeks old, and some of you will have known the daughter. It was her infant daughter was later became Lorna D'Arcangelo, who I think a lot of people would remember. Um, and they had just moved back to town a couple of weeks prior to that, just after the baby was born. And they were living in a cottage next to the King Edward Hotel because her husband's family owned the King Edward Hotel, the McSorleys. Said it was a severe type of flu. And she was the last recorded death. And there was no more mention of the flu in the newspapers after that time. So there's the flu ban coming off for the second time. So general rejoicing is being manifested this week over the statement from Dr. Hamilton. This is a photograph of a woman named Agnes Tom, who was a public health nurse and school nurse in Revelstoke in the 1920s and 1930s. And here she is receiving a King George VI Medal for her work in public health. In 1936, Agnes Tom, who was a registered nurse, wrote a letter to the editor of the Review, reminding parents of the regulation in BC that all children attending school should be vaccinated against smallpox. It was found that only about 12% of the population in BC had been vaccinated. She spoke about the seriousness of smallpox and the threat of an epidemic if vaccination rates did not increase. That before vaccination, smallpox caused at least 1/10 of all deaths. That the 1932 epidemic of smallpox in Vancouver caused 65 cases, only one of whom was vaccinated, and several deaths, including a family of 7 who had stated that they were conscientious objectors to vaccination. This is 1936. The vaccine was provided free by the Provincial Board of Health. In 1927, there were some cases of polio in Revelstoke and some deaths. And at the time, polio or poliomyelitis was called infantile paralysis. And Dr. Hamilton, who was still the public health officer, issued a warning. A little girl named Edith Morwen Griffiths, age 8, had died in Revelstoke on September 1st, 1927. She was the daughter of Mr. and Mrs. F.T. Griffiths of Nelson, but she'd been born in Revelstoke in 1919. And Mr. Griffiths, her father, had been transferred to Nelson as a CPR chief clerk. At the time of Morwen's death, she was visiting her aunt, Mrs. R. Law, along with her mother and younger brother. It was believed that she might have been ill with the disease before they came to Revelstoke. There were no other known cases in Nelson, but several had been reported in Trail and Rossland at that time. And then on September 20th, a little boy, 6-year-old boy named Andrew Shepherd, the son of Mr. and Mrs. A. Shepherd, contracted the disease, and he died on September 21st. It was noted that he had a severe case of the disease. This is 1927. In 1936, his father, who's also named Andrew Shepherd, died in a train accident at near Illecillewaet or Loretta when a crew that was clearing a slide in a big cut was hit by a tender that had come off from an engine as it was being pulled uphill, and the tender came shooting into this cut where the men were working, and 16 of them died. One of them was Andrew Shepherd Sr., the father of this little boy. So the warning was put in by Dr. Hamilton in the September 21st, 1927 paper, saying that schools, theaters, churches, Sunday schools, lodges, and all other public gatherings of more than 20 people were closed until further notice. Parents were urged to keep their children at home, call the doctor if the child showed any signs of the illness, and spray children's nose and throat with a very mild disinfectant, although that was debunked in a later article that I came across. They were hoping that the infantile paralysis ban could be lifted by October 2nd, but more cases showed up. And on October 4th, 1927, a little girl named Margaret Elizabeth Wardrop died. She was aged 5 years and 8 months. She had three sisters and one brother, and they lived on 4th Street East. Said she was ill for 4 days before her death. And you can see this issue of October 5th, 1927. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 articles on infantile paralysis. This one is saying the ban might be lifted by the first of the week. This other one is saying that paralysis rumors were unfounded. There was a lot of fear in the community, and they were saying that it wasn't really a major outbreak. There were just a few cases, and that if people followed the regulations, there was should be no concern. And then on here, there was the whole of this column on this side of the paper and a whole other column on the next page were on information on infantile paralysis by Dr. H.W. Hill, professor of bacteriology and health at UBC and a director of the Vancouver General Hospital. And he's telling parents not to spray their children's nose and throat with disinfectant, that it could be dangerous and it was not helpful. So he had quite a bit of information there, really detailed information about the disease. But after this time, it seems to have, the cases seem to have disappeared. The ban was lifted in stages between October 9th and 17th. Originally, the churches and theaters could open, but only to people over 18, because it was primarily children who were struck with this disease. The schools were still closed until October 18th, except for the 2 highest grades at the high school. And the parents were asked to keep their children at home and not let them play with other children. Now, it was in 1954 that the Jonas Salk developed the polio vaccine. I haven't found any indication that there were any other polio cases in Revelstoke after that 1927 outbreak, but they were really encouraging people to have the vaccine. So this ad was in the May 19th issue of the paper. At that time, children had had 2 doses. They were asking them to come for their third. By March 3rd, it said that there were more than 150 children in Revelstoke who'd been registered to receive the new vaccine. They were focusing initially on children attending kindergarten and grade 1. And then after that, they were opening up to more children. It said the vaccine was developed in 1924, and they were sort of just using it sort of test cases in 1954. But it said that more than 650,000 children in the US and Canada had received the vaccine in 1954, and no ill effects had been reported. So by early June of 1955, it was reported that 1,544 children in the North Okanagan Health Unit had received their 3 injections of the Salk polio vaccine. It was expected that supplies of the vaccine would be available for other age groups of children, and that additional supplies would be available to give a booster dose to the present group of children during the winter months. The Connect Club would hold a Mother's March every year to raise money for polio awareness and treatment. and they helped the public health nurse with the polio immunizations. Said response to the polio vaccine was high, um, but also said that only 52% of infants between the ages of 15 months and 3 years had been immunized against diphtheria, tetanus, and whooping cough, and only 32.7% immunized against smallpox. So there was still fairly low immunization for other diseases because I think people were feeling that they weren't as publicized. They weren't as widely known about. So, but there, people, parents were very scared about polio. So I think that was why there was a big uptake on polio vaccines. So I didn't find anything else in the papers until we get up to March of 2020. And then, of course, we all know what happened there. Nolene Mostert took some really great photographs of the community during that time, and she donated the photographs, over 100 photographs to us. I'm not showing all 100 right now, I'll just show a few, but this is First Street at Mackenzie with nobody there. We never see a site like that where you can find a parking spot, wherever you want, right outside the bank or the clinic. So it showed like how deserted the community was. There were a lot of people were encouraged to put red hearts in their windows, or hearts in their windows. I took it a step further and made a crocheted banner of hearts and put that on my front porch, and then kept adding other banners as I went along. But there were quite a few red hearts in windows at that time. People trying to show support to the health workers. There's the Roxy. This is temporary closure due to COVID-19 virus. Please stay safe, Revi. See Facebook or website for updates. And the current owner had just purchased it at the time, so it was a bit of a hit for him at the time. This is at Southside Foods, their list of their precautions. Do not come in if you're sick or showing symptoms. Only come in to buy reasonable amounts of the essentials. Please respect the product limits. No reusable bags allowed in store. Please leave them outside. No public washroom, bottle returns, self-serve or hot case. Maintain a safe distance of 6 feet away from others. Stay on the blue markers by the cash area. And they had mentioned that their baskets were all sanitized on a regular basis before they were put back in the stack. And this is their COVID information station at Save on Foods, and hand sanitizer. I found that there are some stores I couldn't use their hand sanitizer. It was too scented, and Save On was one of them. I think Home Hardware was another one. So I always had my own with me. There's the empty toilet paper shelves in Save On Foods. I'll remember that. And then there's another picture of the shelves for flour, also empty because everybody took up baking when they were home under the ban. The social distancing markers at 7-Eleven. You can still see the markers in some of the stores around town. Mountain Meals, which was next door where Fable Books is now, and said that they were open for takeout only. And that's on Frisbee Ridge. We got the Stay Safe Revy, and they were offering takeout only as well. Quite a few of the other restaurants were doing that. Lift closed at the resort. I remember that a lot of people in town were concerned that the resort didn't close down sooner because, of course, they were bringing in a lot of the people from other countries who may have already had contact with COVID. So I remember reading that in the local media that there was a lot of people kind of criticizing the resort for not shutting down earlier, but they shut down middle of March along with everyone else. And I think we all remember the lineups at the post office. And there's Dr. Mostert and a couple of other hospital staff with their enhanced personal protection. And somebody came up with the idea that every night at 7 o'clock we could go outside and bang pots or pans or ring bells to show our support for the healthcare workers and frontline workers in essential services. And of course, the parks were all closed. Um, so yeah, I think I've already started to forget a lot of what went on during COVID. There were some restrictions were taken off by June. We were able to open the museum again in June, and I think schools opened in the fall. So there were some things that were lifting, but different waves came through. So there was different restrictions on at different times, and then I think the vaccines rolled out in I think 2021 they started, and masking protocols were underway in a lot of places. Our daughter and her husband got married on May 1st, 2021, and we had a 10-person COVID wedding in the Heritage Garden here. So there was a lot of effects. So we're thinking maybe on the 10th anniversary of COVID, we'll do a more comprehensive talk about what happened in the community and sort of the timeline of what happened then. So that's my talk for today. We're doing a series now called Film Friday, and the next one is here on October 17th at noon, and the film is Why We Write, Poets of Vernon. These are all films from the Knowledge Network. And then the next Brown Bag talk is on October 22nd, and that will be on bears. So thank you for coming today. I'm just going to